Hello. Good evening, everyone. Just letting Facebook load in the live manager here and getting my phone pulled up for comments. I hope everybody's week is going well. It's already Wednesday, if you can believe it. All right, we are in business. I have my phone pulled up for any questions or comments that might come in as we are going through day 3. We are halfway through our building emotional resiliency in postpartum, the 6 losses of postpartum. And we are going to be diving in tonight into this loss of community. And the last 2 nights, I have covered the loss of self and the loss of voice so far for this special series. And if you haven't had a chance to check out those 2 videos yet, the replays are up and available, so feel free to go back and catch up on that material, because I think it is just so crucial for us to have this understanding and this sense of commonality of these experiences, because it is so common in the postpartum time frame to kind of navigate these feelings of loss and this emotional grief that we can have tied to these experiences, and that it is very normal. It is a normal experience to go through something like this when we are going through such a monumental shift in our life. Even if we have had previous children, previous postpartum experiences, it still happens, and it still can occur for us with each subsequent birth and postpartum. And so for those of you who are joining for the first time tonight, for some of our newer folks that have joined the group, welcome. My name is Jessie Sletton, and I am a postpartum empowerment coach. I help birth givers exchange surviving for thriving in the perinatal time frame. And I do this through highly customizable, holistic support plans that are focused on healing, nourishing, and bonding in postpartum. And I work with folks who are in pregnancy, who are trying to plan for their postpartum time frame ahead of time, which is always fabulous if you're able to do that. I highly recommend it, because you can really lay the foundation for yourself before the emotions are heightened, before we're having all these experiences kind of overwhelm our nervous system and just our whole existence really, once we're in that postpartum time frame. But I also work with folks who are already postpartum, and I've worked with folks who are fresh postpartum, all the way through a year or beyond, just depending on where you are in your journey and the support that you are looking for and needing. It's never too late to reach out for that support and to really get back on track and try to reclaim this very special time in our lives, and try to have the most support to have it be what you envision, be what this time should be about, which is really your family, you and your healing, and the whole process of bonding in general, and not so much about being overwhelmed and in this state of depletion and depression and this grief that can hang around for a long time if we don't work through that and get the proper support that we need. So if you are looking for that extra support, I included my link in the description above. So feel free to schedule a free strategy session with me. It is a 45-minute call where we will sit down and we'll talk about where you are in your journey. We'll talk about where you're struggling. And we'll talk about what your goals are as far as your infant feeding goals, your nutrition, your healing goals, and really what you envision your postpartum time frame to be. That dream postpartum experience. And then we'll talk about how working together one-on-one could really help fill those gaps and help you feel empowered to make that a reality for yourself. So schedule some time with me on my calendar, and I've opened up some extra spots this week, and I'm going to be doing the same for next week as well for those who want to chat with me a little bit further about that. But tonight we're going to be diving into, like I mentioned at the beginning, the loss of community. And we're going to talk about how that can really look. There's different ways that that can kind of come into play during this postpartum time frame. And then I'm going to share with you some of my best tips for navigating through this and being able to come out of this experience with resiliency and strength, right? Because that's the whole point. We don't want it to be this sense of loss that we are reeling in for a permanent time. Because I always say pregnancy is temporary, but postpartum is forever. And so we really need to lay this foundation where we are getting the support we need and deserve and are worthy of, and putting into place these plans to help ensure that goes more smoothly once baby is here. And once we hit some of those bumps in the road, we have plans that we can fall back on. All right, so let's dive in tonight. If you are joining live, say hello. Let me know you're here. And I will say hello back. And if you have any questions, let me know for sure. I will be checking those as we go. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about as far as this sense of loss, this loss of community that we can experience moving into the postpartum time frame. Like I mentioned before, there's different areas that we can feel this in. And there's kind of three main areas that I wanted to talk about tonight. This can come about in other ways as well. But the three main areas I wanted to address tonight are the community within our partnerships. So if we are coupled, how that dynamic can change in postpartum and how we can kind of experience this sense of loss with our partners. Then there's also this sense of loss for first-time parents. And we're going to talk about how this loss of community after having a baby can really shift those friendships and that dynamic as well. And then, of course, we're going to talk about our current reality of birthing in the middle of a pandemic and how that can affect our community supports and really kind of contribute to this sense of loss of community. And in general, I just wanted to touch, I talked about this in the description above, but in general, our society is just not set up well to be a supportive communal system in which we are birthing our babies. Other cultures around the world view this time frame as very sacred, and they view it as a communal experience. And so they really make it a priority to surround the birth giver and their family and the baby with a ton of support. They have various traditions that most of them are centered around food and nourishment and ensuring that the birth giver is cared for and fed and resting and all of these things. And that's just not the way our Western society, our modernized society is set up. And so we're already moving into this time frame with this lack of community as it is. And then the community that we do have that surround us, we experience these other types of losses. And so I wanted to touch on that we're already kind of moving into this transformational time of our lives within a societal construct that does not support us very well. And there's already this expectation of, especially in the United States here, being independent, being able to take everything on, being able to do it all ourselves, the super mom, superhero ideal of being able to bounce back right after having baby and being able to go right back into the daily routine, except now we have a baby on our hip, right? And so that already is the frame, the structure in which we are going through the postpartum time frame. So let's talk a little bit about the loss of community that we can experience. And let's touch first on the loss that can happen, this feeling of loss when it comes to our partner. So if we are coupled, when we are having our baby and we are birthing and bringing them home, there's obviously a shift in dynamic as it is, right, between partner and birth giver. It's just, it happens naturally. It's very normal and it should. There should be this shift that happens. Our relationship dynamic is going to grow, it's going to change. And then sometimes we see that there's this mourning or this loss of that community when the dynamic shifts in a way that is really disrupted with this power change that can happen. And this, even if you have a very supportive partner, can still happen within ourselves when we feel like we have to really heavily depend on our partner, and even in order to even have some of our more basic needs met. And so really there's this requirement of the leaning in to this other person for support. And that can kind of sometimes cause some resentment to bubble up, right? So even something as simple as needing to ask for help or coverage to get a shower, right? Whereas maybe perhaps partner doesn't have to do that. They can go shower whenever they want. They can, pick up and do something that we feel as the birth giver, we feel more constrained to be able to do, and we have to rely on others outside of ourselves. And so that resentment, that shift in power, and that shift in that dynamic can happen, and we can have this sense of loss there, where there's no longer seeming like there's this equal footing between you and your partner. So that's one way that we can kind of have this unexpected loss, even like I mentioned, even if we have a very supportive partner, there's just this shift that occurs. And then there's this sense of loss that we can feel when we are perhaps the first of our friends and our friend community and our support system in that aspect that has a child. We're the first that goes through this process. And we have this sense of loss of that community there because they just don't get it, right? They just don't, even if they are supportive and they're showing up and they're trying to be there for you, there is just no way to really understand this change in your life if you have not gone through it yourself, right? And so we experience this loss of community where we are no longer a part of that in the same way. We're kind of off to the side, right? We aren't able to pick up and go out for a night with our friends just like that. There's a lot of, a lot to go into being able to leave, right? Or if we have the baby with us, there's a lot of coordination, a lot of things that have to be packed in the car, a lot of this stuff that this and that and the other, and it becomes very stressful sometimes to be able to even leave the house. And so we have just this sense of being kind of left behind sometimes by our friends, or misunderstood, or there's a lot of different emotions that can come in. And so it's really hard to connect back to that support system that we once had. And this connects really well with the loss of identity that we talked about in day one. It's very much tied to this loss of identity, because a lot of times our identity can be tied to our support systems and these friends that we, surround ourselves with. And when that shifts, on top of the change in identity we're already experiencing with just the birth of our child, you can really see how these are all so interconnected and can really bleed into one another. And then the last one that I wanted to cover was this loss of community, just in the times that we are birthing in right now, in the middle of this pandemic, it has put so much pressure and changes and difficulties in general with the whole birthing process, the postpartum process. Things have been so dynamic and changing and disruptive, and there's just been a lot going on just in general with this pandemic. And when we look at our smaller community, our family, our friends, those who we want to share this experience with the most, this layer of apprehension from the pandemic, from maybe some fear of the baby getting sick and having to have all these extra measures for safety, and all the hospital requirements and the number of people who can be visiting at the hospital, and all these different things can really change what we have had envisioned for this time in these experiences with our community. And so we really have this mourning that we start going through. We're mourning what could have been with this relationship with our family and friends and baby, and being able to share in those moments. And that can be really difficult too, this sense of loss there with our community as well. And so there's so much that can go into these feelings of this loss of community and that communal support that we have, and that it might be different than what we had expected or hoped for or envisioned. And again, this can be connected back to the loss of voice as well, where our community that we do have surrounding us, just maybe they're not available to hear our stories and to hear how we're feeling, whether it's physically available, or sometimes they just don't have the capacity to hold those stories for us safely. And so we have this experience of shutting down our voice, or not being able to share our voice and our experiences with that community either. And so again, all of this is kind of tied together, and we can see how it contributes to one another, and it can exacerbate one another really too. But there is hope. I don't want this to be all doom and gloom, right? Because that's why we're here. We're talking and focusing on the resiliency piece and the strength that we can find within our support planning to be able to plan ahead for these things that can happen and that are very common and that a lot of people experience. If you're watching this live or in the replay, I'd love to hear if any of this is resonating with you, this loss of community, the three things that I had covered, or if maybe all three something that you experienced with this loss of community, because this really helps us understand and normalize this experience. But let's talk a little bit about how we can kind of safeguard our heart space, how we can really help strengthen our community supports so that we can feel held and witnessed and seen and heard in our journey after baby. And so if we're thinking about this partnership, this loss of community within our partners, this is something that I think is very important, and often what we don't even think about planning ahead for in postpartum. And I love when I'm working with my clients, I have several questions in my support planning process that is specifically targeted to work with your partner. So if you are coupled, we sit down together and I have you talk together about planning. How are we going to turn toward one another when things get difficult? What are some activities we know that are simple but connective that we can fall back on when we're feeling that separation, that disconnect? Another great way is how you're communicating with your partner and one another. I've recently I can't remember, maybe a couple weeks ago, a training or kind of a topic discussion around nonviolent communication. And this is one of the models that I use and teach with my clients when it comes to communicating a need from someone else or being able to reflect what you are seeing in a behavior in someone else in a way to share how that's impacting you in a way that is actually heard instead of causing someone's defenses to come up. And so, really working on that communication piece about how you share how you're feeling with your partner in the moment and before ahead of time, saying when I am demonstrating X and Y, Z type of behaviors, I might be feeling anxious. I might be feeling unappreciated, these types of things. And you can really talk through that and be able to come up with a way that you can come together instead of kind of pulling apart further during these difficult times. And so that's one of my biggest tips, is really talking about that communication piece ahead of time and creating a plan around that, and really kind of planning for those moments of connection where you can fall back on that relationship where you feel connected again. So that's something that you can put into place now or ahead of time if you are in your pregnancy. And this is something that I help my clients do as well, because sometimes it can be difficult to think about those kind of things. And so brainstorming around that and kind of having some extra support around that can be really helpful. And then as far as this experience of loss with our community, if we're a first-time parent, one of the biggest things that I can recommend doing is finding, I'm not saying you have to end those relationships by any means. Those are still, usually, and if not, that's fine too. But if they're still valued relationships, they're just changing, and that's okay. And being able to have the space to mourn what they once were, and kind of the courage to embrace the way they're transforming, but also finding a sense of community with parents who are going through similar experiences can be so powerful. So finding maybe some local or virtual support groups for first-time parents who are experiencing similar things. There is so much value in being able to talk about shared experiences. And so that's something that I really recommend you do, and trying to find those local resources, which is actually another thing that I help my clients do as well, is I help research some of those local communal supports, not only for parent support groups, those type of things, but also just community supports in general. What's available to you in your community to have that extra support during the postpartum time frame. And something else too, I don't want to lose sight of the folks who aren't first-time parents experiencing a different type of loss because they've had this experience in the past, and maybe now birthing during this pandemic time frame, having a more difficult postpartum experience the second or third or fourth time around. Sometimes there's this feeling that there is no real space for these folks because there's a lot of first-time parent groups out there, but maybe there's just a different way that these, more seasoned parents are experiencing this type of loss, and they're wanting to connect with other folks that are in that same type of boat. And this is where those virtual groups can really come into play, where you can find folks who are on their second, third, fourth postpartum experience, who are kind of mourning these losses in similar fashions, so that you can have that commonality and that safe space to talk about these feelings, and have that be held and witnessed in a different way. So virtual and in-person groups are excellent ways to be able to do that. And then being able to find how you can communicate to your friend group, that you are experiencing this shift in friendship, and learning how to ask for what you need from that specific group of people, and kind of being able to share that experience in a way. But if they aren't somebody who can understand and can't hold that safe space for you, then really finding these other communities where you can find that is so important. And then I wanted to touch, of course, on it's very much related. I kind of already talked about this a little bit, but with just the sense of community and loss with the pandemic, really being able to figure out what supports you can put into place for yourself if traveling isn't an option for family. Let's say, for an example, what local supports again are there in your community that you can look toward, whether that be, you know, friends or family that are nearby or closer by that can maybe step in versus folks who would have to fly, all these kind of things to consider. And who can you potentially hire if it's possible for you in your budget to be able to help you. Postpartum doulas are huge assets during the postpartum time frame. Being able to be hands-on and support you in a way that is needed. I can tell you for certain that having a postpartum doula my second time around made a huge difference for me, being able to have that support. And then knowing which family members ahead of time you can count on for certain things and being able to plan that out ahead of time. And if you're already postpartum, just taking 10 minutes to sit down and really thinking about your community structure and who you could call for if you need help at night, who you would call if you need to leave the house for something, who you trust with your baby. All these things, really sitting down and thinking about that and figuring that out so that you have that list to fall back on when you need the help versus panicking and not knowing where to turn when you need that help in the moment. So those are some of my recommendations for really kind of building up your support plan. There is so much that goes into this. This is, like I've said before, just the tip of the iceberg. I have an extensive support plan that I use with my clients that really dives deep into not only these actionable, tangible items of support when it comes to community, emotional support, partnerships, all of these things, but the emotional side of it too. Because like I said, I think it was yesterday in day 2, so much of what leaves a lasting impact on our experience in postpartum is that emotional, mental side of things. How we felt in the postpartum time frame. Yeah, we'll probably remember some of those really memorable tactile moments that can happen, or if we had a really rough time with chest or breastfeeding or something along those lines. But it's the way those things made us feel that create those lasting memories and kind of the way we view our experience. And so when we really are intentional about our planning around how to support ourselves on that level and in that way that we can feel seen, heard, and in control, which we're going to talk about the loss of control the last day next week. This is a really big one, and everything is tied to this loss of control that can happen and occur in postpartum. But when we can try to turn the tide in our favor by being really intentional about our planning around this, that's when we really can see the difference in how we feel about our postpartum experience. And that's absolutely why I'm so passionate about what I do and how I work with postpartum folks and those in pregnancy to prepare ahead of time, is really trying to shift how this postpartum time frame is really just experienced. I want to reclaim this time as something that is beautiful, even amongst some of this loss and this hardship that can happen. And support is the crucial piece in all of it. All right, so that's all I have for tonight for everybody, for the loss of community. I'd love to hear how this is resonating with you. If you've experienced one or all so far of these losses that we've talked about. This is going to be it for this week. We did the 3 losses this week. We're going to take a short break to allow people to be able to catch up on the replays, to really kind of decompress some of this information that we've been talking about. I really want you to sit with this, and if you are able to, journal about what's coming up for you. Write out how you're feeling about these losses. Make connections to your own experiences and start making some plans for how to put more support into place for you to help really strengthen um, your reserves, to kind of help combat some of these losses and navigate through them a little bit more gracefully. And then, of course, reach out to me if you are looking for some additional support with this whole planning process, because it is one of the main things that I do with my clients, my postpartum clients. And we will be back for the rest of this series next week, starting Monday. So, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we will be finishing out the 6 losses. So, we will be doing loss of time, loss of control. Oh, first will be loss of world, then loss of time, and then loss of control. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. The events are already posted, so you can check those out. And we're going to be tying back to everything we've talked about this week and see how they're all so interconnected. I will be back here live on Friday for Free Coaching Fridays. So if some of this stuff is bringing things up for you, I encourage you to bring that to Free Coaching Fridays. I would love to work through some of this with you. I will be holding space for that, and I want it to be a place where you can bring your questions or maybe bring some of these things that are coming up for you, some of these emotional experiences, and we can coach through that on Friday. All right, everybody, I will talk to you real soon. Have a great rest of your week, and I will see you back here Friday. Bye.